I wasn't planning on talking about this tonight, but you ever notice how certain nights don't feel like they belong to the same sequence as the days that came before them? Like something about the pacing shifts just enough that you can't quite line it up with what you remember. Not in a dramatic way, nothing you could point to and say, this is different. Just a subtle misalignment in how things unfold. Like the space between moments stretches or compresses depending on how closely you're paying attention. And the more you notice it, the harder it is to ignore. Like realizing a rhythm has been slightly off for longer than you thought. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you've already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio, broadcasting somewhere between what you've been told and what you're starting to realize. Signals holding steady for now, though that can change without warning. So if it's coming through clearly, you might want to stay with it. We're coming up on about 2:11 a.m., maybe a little past, depends on where you're listening from. Time is a little inconsistent tonight. Not enough to matter in any practical sense, but enough that it's noticeable if you're tracking it closely, which most people aren't, not at this hour. Not unless something gives them a reason. Got a report coming in from a rural stretch just outside a small town. Listener claims they saw something standing along the roadside. Not moving, not reacting to the vehicle, just there, tall, narrow, posture slightly off, like the proportions didn't quite match anything recognizable. No attempt to approach, no attempt to hide, just a fixed presence. And what stuck with them wasn't the fear. It was the stillness of it. Like it wasn't part of the environment, but it also wasn't separate from it. No follow-up yet. Probably nothing. But we'll keep an ear on it. You start to realize after a while that most things don't announce themselves clearly. They don't arrive with context or explanation. They just appear in fragments, small details that don't fully resolve. And if you're the kind of person who needs closure and needs everything to make sense, those fragments can be uncomfortable. Because they don't give you enough to work with. They just sit there. Incomplete. Quick station identification. You're tuned to Dove and Serpent Radio. Signal stable, more or less. And if it's reaching you, you're exactly where you need to be, even if you don't know why. There's a study about how certain trees communicate, right, through these underground fungal networks, transferring nutrients, warning each other about threats, adjusting behavior based on signals that never reach the surface. And it challenges the idea that communication requires awareness in the way we define it, that something can be responsive, adaptive, and even cooperative, without ever forming what we would call a conscious thought. Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by The Quiet Room, for those who need a place where nothing follows you in. The Quiet Room. Leave everything at the threshold. There's something about hearing an ad like that at this hour that lands differently. Like it's not trying to convince you of anything, just reminding you that certain spaces exist, whether you've found them yet or not. We've got a weather update coming through, mostly clear across most listening regions, low wind, stable pressure readings, though there have been scattered reports of localized stillness. Not complete silence, just a reduction in ambient movement, like the environment is holding steady in a way that feels slightly prolonged. Stillness like that tends to mean something. Not necessarily something you can measure, but something you can feel if you're paying attention. We had a caller earlier. Signal wasn't great, dropped out a few times, but they mentioned noticing the same sequence of events repeating across different days, Not identical, just structurally similar. Same like conversation, same pauses, same outcomes, but just with slight variations. And at first they thought it was a coincidence, but after the fourth or fifth time, it started to feel more deliberate, even if they couldn't explain how. And that's the thing about patterns. They don't need to be perfect to be real. They just need to repeat enough times that we start to recognize them. You ever sit in a place long enough that it starts to feel unfamiliar? Like the longer you look at something, the less certain you are about what you're seeing. Like not because it's changed, but because your perception has. Like you've stepped back just enough to notice the structure instead of the object. And for a moment, it feels almost like abstract, like you're looking at something you don't fully understand anymore. We've got a short advisory coming through. If you've been noticing repetition increasing, same thoughts, same interactions, same internal loops cycling with slight variations, don't rush to dismiss it. Observation doesn't require immediate interpretation. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio, and we're still here. Signal's holding, though there's a slight distortion creeping in at the edges. Nothing major, just enough to remind you it's not fixed. There was a report years ago about a stretch of highway where drivers claimed that they would lose small amounts of time, not enough to trigger major concern, but just like a few minutes unaccounted for, arriving earlier than expected with like no memory of a particular segment of the drive. And over time it became normalized. Something people joked about, something expected, which is interesting to me because normalization doesn't require understanding. It just requires repetition. We're coming up on about 2:38 a.m., though again, that's approximate. Time's just not aligning perfectly tonight, so take that as you will. Support for this signal comes from Meridian Sleep Systems, where your dreams are monitored for continuity. Meridian, rest assured. See, dreams are another thing that don't behave the way we expect. They compress time, they expand it, they rearrange it entirely. And yet, when you wake up, you accept that they happened, even if they don't fit with the structure of waking reality. And that suggests that your mind is capable of experiencing time in ways that don't match the clock. We've got another report coming in, this one from a coastal region. Listener claims they saw lights moving just beneath the surface of the water. Not reflections, not bioluminescence as far as they could tell. Something more structured, moving in coordinated patterns. And when they tried to follow it, it disappeared. Not gradually, just gone. No confirmation, no follow-up, just a report. Do you ever think about how much of your experience is based on expectation? How you walk into a situation already assuming how it will unfold, and most of the time it does. Not because it's predetermined, but because you're participating in maintaining that pattern, and every once in a while something disrupts it. Doesn't break it completely, but it's just enough to make you notice that it can be broken. Got another bulletin coming through. Unconfirmed reports of minor time discrepancies. Nothing measurable on a large scale, just individual experiences of lost or gained minutes. If you notice anything like that, don't panic. Just take note of it. Sometimes awareness is enough. There's a species of octopus that can change not just its color, but its texture and its shape and everything, blending into the environment so completely that it becomes almost impossible to distinguish it from its surroundings. And it doesn't do this consciously in the way we understand it. It just responds, adapts, and aligns itself with what's around it. Which, for me, raises questions of identity. And how much of what we consider fixed is actually fluid. You're tuned to Dove and Serpent Radio. Signal still holding. Though there's a slight fluctuation coming through, nothing to be concerned about. Just a reminder that this isn't a fixed channel. There was a story about a man who claimed he kept seeing the same figure in different locations. Not the same person exactly, but the same presence, same posture, same way of standing. And at first he thought it was a coincidence, then just pattern recognition, then something else entirely. And well, he never got an answer, just more sightings. Yeah, maybe that's the point. Not everything resolves. Some things just repeat. We've got a quick advisory if you've been experiencing moments where things feel slightly out of sync, where your internal sense of timing doesn't match external cues. You're not alone in that. We've had multiple similar reports coming in over the past few hours. Could be nothing. Could be something else. Hard to say. And do you ever notice how awareness doesn't arrive all at once? How it comes in layers, small realizations stacking on top of each other until something shifts. Not all dramatically, but just enough that you see things differently than you did before. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. We're coming up on about 3:02 a.m., or something close to it. Time's a little fluid tonight, so don't rely on exact numbers. Tonight's signal is also brought to you by the Threshold Company, helping you recognize the moment things start to change before they do. The Threshold Company, you've already crossed it. There's something about thresholds that people underestimate. The point where something transitions from one state to another, not gradually, but definitively, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And most of the time you don't recognize it until after it's happened. We've got one more report before things start to thin out further. Listener claims they heard something outside their home. Not movement exactly, more like presence. Something that didn't make noise but was noticeable in its absence of sound. Like everything else had gone quiet around it. No visual confirmation, no evidence. Just the feeling. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. Signal's still here. For now. And if you've been noticing things, patterns, repetitions, inconsistencies, small shifts in how things align, you are not imagining it. That doesn't mean anything is wrong. It just means you're paying attention. Keep the signal close. Transmission holds. For now. You know, sometimes it's not even the big things that give it away. It's like the small inconsistencies. Like the kind you'd normally ignore, like checking the same message twice because you're sure it said something different the first time. Or hearing a sound repeat with just enough variation that it feels intentional instead of random. And you tell yourself it's nothing, because most of the time it is. But every once in a while, it lingers a little longer than it should. We're still here, by the way. Dove and Serpent Radio. Signal's holding, though there's a bit of distortion coming in at the edges now. It's not going to interrupt anything, but it's just enough to remind you that this is not a fixed line. It's something you are tuned into, not something you control. There was another report that came through earlier tonight that didn't get much attention at the time. There's something about a man who claimed he kept waking up at the exact same time every night. Not close to the same, but like exactly the same, down to the minute. At first he thought it was just his internal clock adjusting. But then he started noticing that when he woke up, there was always a moment where everything felt completely still. Not just quiet, but like paused. Like the world hadn't fully resumed yet. And he couldn't prove it, couldn't measure it. But it happened often enough that he stopped setting alarms altogether. Probably just a sleep cycle issue, right? But it is interesting. You ever notice how the more you pay attention to something, the more it seems to reveal layers you didn't see before? Like there's always another level just beneath the one you're currently aware of. And most people don't go looking for it. Not because they can't, but because they're comfortable with what they already understand. And comfort has a way of limiting curiosity without you even realizing it. We do have a brief update coming through, nothing major. Just a few scattered mentions from listeners about devices behaving slightly off. Clocks resetting, screens flickering without clear cause, connections dropping and returning. All explainable individually, all easy to dismiss. And when you start to hear the same types of reports clustered together, even loosely, it becomes something you at least take note of. Not confirmation, just observation. You're tuned to Dove and Serpent Radio. If the signal's reaching you, you're still on the frequency. And that's not always something you can assume. There's a type of deep sea creature that lives so far below the surface that never encounters natural light, not once, in its entire existence. And instead, it generates its own, like, not constant, but just like in brief pulses, enough to navigate, enough to communicate in ways that we don't fully understand. And it made me think about how much of what we rely on externally could, under the right conditions, be generated internally instead. Light, direction, awareness. We tend to think of those things as things we perceive. But what if they're things we produce? We've got a weather advisory. Conditions remain mostly stable, though there's been a subtle shift in pressure readings across a few regions. Nothing that would register as significant on a standard report, but enough that some listeners have mentioned a kind of heaviness in the air. Not uncomfortable, just noticeable. Like the atmosphere is slightly denser than usual. Pressure changes do that. So does attention. You ever feel like the more you focus on something, the more real it becomes? Not just in your mind, but in how it interacts with you. Like your attention is doing more than just observing. It's like participating and shaping the way things unfold. And it may sound abstract until you notice how often your expectations line up with your experiences. Not perfectly, but consistently enough. And maybe it's worth considering. We had a caller earlier who mentioned something I haven't heard phrased quite that way before. Said she feels like she's slightly out of sync with everything around her. Not disconnected, not separate, just like a fraction of a second off. Like she's responding just a little too early or a little too late in conversations, like she's stepping into moments that have already started or haven't quite begun yet. It could be stress. Could be fatigue. But it's a very specific description. We're coming up on somewhere around 3:18 a.m., maybe a little past. Time's continuing to drift tonight. Not in a way that changes anything practical, just enough that it's hard to pin down exactly where you are in it. Support for this signal comes from the quiet room, where nothing follows you in and nothing leaves with you. The quiet room, still open if you can find it. There's something about spaces like that, you know? Whether they exist physically or not, the idea of a place where everything drops away, where the noise doesn't just quiet down, but it disappears entirely. And for most people that sounds appealing, until they actually experience something close to it, then it becomes something else. Because silence like that isn't empty. It's full. And do you ever notice how your thoughts behave differently when there's nothing competing with them? How they stretch out, loop back, connect in ways they normally wouldn't. And sometimes they land on something that feels important, something that feels like it matters, even if you don't act on it immediately. Got another report coming in, this one from someone who claims they've been seeing the same sequence of numbers repeatedly across different contexts. Not just on clocks, but on receipts, addresses, timestamps. And at first they thought it was coincidence, but it happened often enough that they started looking for it. And once they started looking, it showed up more. Which raises the question of whether it was always there or whether their attention brought it into focus. That's the tricky part. You don't always know which direction the signal is moving. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. Signal still holding, although it's thinning out slightly. Not unusual for this hour. Happens most nights around now. There's a phenomenon in physics, right, where particles can become entangled, meaning that the state of one is directly related to the state of another, regardless of distance. And changes to one will affect the other one instantly, or at least in a way that doesn't align with our usual understanding of time and space. And we can observe it, measure it, and confirm it, but we don't fully understand how it works. And yet it does. And it makes you wonder how many other things operate on principles we haven't fully grasped yet. Not because they're hidden, but because we're not looking at them in the right way. We've got a final advisory for this stretch of the broadcast. If you've been noticing subtle shifts in how things align, timing, repetition, awareness, don't rush to categorize it. Just take note. Sometimes recognition comes before understanding. And that's enough. We're still here. Dove and Serpent Radio. Signals faint now, but it's there. And if you're still listening, that means something. Keep the signal close. We'll hold it as long as we can.